on the
Whoa.
So I'm going to be using the chat window quite regularly this morning, just to continue to foster some engagement. I just sent a good morning message in there, so definitely feel free to reply back if you have a question, and we'll answer it there. In addition, I'd love to kind of capture what agency you're from. So if you are comfortable putting in the chat window which agency you're with, that would be great. That way we can understand who's joining us today. My name is Jason Caffrey. I'm your Tableau account executive for the PAC Northwest. I cover the states of Washington and Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, as well as King and Multnomah counties, and then the cities of Portland and Tacoma and Seattle. Thanks for joining us. We are going to help you see and understand data from the perspective of Tableau. That's what we do. At the outset, I'll share just a couple of very brief resources that might be helpful in your particular role in your organization. And then we're going to turn it over to Kevin McKinney, who's going to take us through the art of the possible with data. Kevin, would you like to just give a quick intro?
Sure. So my name is Kevin McKinney. I am the lead solutions engineer for the Pacific Northwest, and I have been with Tableau as an engineer for the better part of the last 5 years. In that capacity, I have worked almost exclusively with state and local government agencies and educational institutions on efforts to support them through data. I have years of experience working in this sector, and am always excited to work with our customers on public support issues.
Maybe they will be quiet.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that rundown. And I'm just going to start here by sharing a couple of resources on leading through change. So this is an initiative developed by Tableau that I just want to highlight here as we get started. It really is focused on a variety of elements that all of us will need to come together on to reopen our workplaces, restart the economy, continue to manage the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak and pandemic that we're working through. And what we found is in crisis, we turn to data. And that's one of the things that's been great about, I think, this last few months is we have now, even my grandparents are now very comfortable looking at visualizations and dashboards in a way that they weren't a few months back. These are normal for them now. So looking at the King County dashboards, for instance, is something that is really, I think, empowering. So there obviously are three serious areas that we're focusing on: the public health crisis, the business crisis, the economic crisis. And there's three key areas where we're looking to help, and that's to stabilize the situation, create transparency, monitoring and communicating what's happening, showing how we're responding and adapting operations, caring for employees, and then moving into reopening our workplaces and communities, and then restarting the economy and growing again. So there are a couple of websites I'm just going to show off that will tell the story. One is the Tableau.com Leading Through Change site that really talks about how data can unify in a time of crisis. We've got some white papers in here. There are some examples of, for instance, some resources we provide for small businesses, as well as for anyone on this call that maybe wants to take the next step with Tableau and actually learn our platform. We actually have made e-learning platform free for 90 days. As long as you sign up by June 30th, you'll have complete access to our e-learning platform. This includes courseware. This courseware is focused on Tableau Desktop. So there's 3 modules there for Desktop 1, Desktop 2, and Desktop 3. There's also courseware in Tableau Prep. And now all of our content is focused on role type. So if you are a data scientist versus a community leader or a server architect, the content is going to be a little bit different for you. And it actually is going to be focused on your role. So in addition to some desktop and prep content, you'll actually find things on dashboard design best practices. So if I select the author view up here, for instance, you can see that that has 3 different courses: a desktop Desktop 1 fundamentals and a skills assessment. Whereas if I'm a data scientist, I'm probably going to get a little bit more detail on Prep Builder as well. So again, this is free for 90 days as long as you register by June 30th. I will put this in the chat window so everybody has access to it. And then I will also direct you to work.com, which I mentioned a lot of the elements here, including contact tracing, rapid crisis response, workforce reskilling, and response management, and also setting up a workplace command center. This is a site that has a ton of great resources for any one of these elements and how we partner with Salesforce, our good friend and partner organization, to actually launch these in a series of apps. So I'm going to pause there. The course overview. If you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat window. Otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing and the rest of our time together to Kevin McKinney, who's going to take us through the art of the possible with data.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. So I'm going to go ahead and claim this here.
And thanks to those of you that are using that window, I'm going to be monitoring that throughout, so feel free to put your questions right there.
So when we talk about Tableau, I want to sort of set the stage. As Jason mentioned, our goal as an organization is to help people see and understand their data. And there's a whole platform of products that support that endeavor. Let's go ahead and mute all, Jason.
I just did.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's take a look at the platform and get a sense of what we're going to be looking at today. So the Tableau platform is composed of three basic pillars. There's Tableau Desktop, which represents the core of the Tableau platform. This was the flagship tool of Tableau since its inception and represents the principal content development and data connection tool. In an effort to support that same mission is Tableau Prep, one of our newest pillars of the platform. Tableau Prep is a data transformation tool, or an ETL tool. It's principally designed to help clean up data, but is also an incredibly powerful data connection tool and can really help to take data that is complex or needs to be significantly transformed or cleaned up in order to work with, and bring that data through a prep flow process into Tableau Desktop. Finally, there is Tableau Server. We have sort of two sides of this coin: Tableau Online, which is our software as a service version. It essentially is Tableau Server is our sharing platform, and either we in Tableau Online can support the infrastructure, or you through traditional Tableau Server can support the infrastructure. But the idea is that Tableau Server represents a single place, a single repository of content and data resources that can be distributed out to your organization. It is the sharing and collaboration element of the Tableau platform, and that capacity, it makes it a really important part of any Tableau deployment. Tableau Server also supports all of the enterprise scale security infrastructure, as well as all of the automation and management of any of these processes. So a critical component of the Tableau platform. During today's conversation, we're going to be principally looking at Tableau Desktop to get an idea of how people work with data inside of Tableau to do ad hoc analysis and develop insights, and eventually develop content that can be shared with their organization. We're also going to be spending a little bit of time on Tableau Server, talking a bit about the sharing and collaboration capabilities of content once it has been developed. So let's dive right in. I have here Tableau Desktop. We're going to use this to get started. So before we connect to data, I want to take a brief moment here to talk about how Tableau has designed the Tableau Desktop interface, and most of our interfaces to help facilitate working on whatever it is that you're working on. And that starts over here in the data connection pane. Tableau generally has a left to right flow of content. The most important decisions are often over here to the left. And as you work your way over to the right, you will be making choices and developing visualizations and dashboards sort of in the center with ancillary information and sort of context provided around the edges. So here we have the ability to choose how we want to and what we want to connect to. Tableau has over 80 different named data connectors and can additionally connect to hundreds of other data resources depending on their structure. Here, if you're interested in working with Excel or text files right off the bat, which is what we're going to be doing in today's exercise, it's really easy to get started. But if I have databases that I use frequently, like SQL Server or Oracle, or more cloud resources like Google or Amazon, there's lots of different ways to connect to data in Tableau. In addition to that, we have ODBC, JDBC, and web data connectors. These allow us to extend this capability of connecting to data far beyond this simple list, so that we can reference either traditional data structures using ODBC or JDBC connectors, or APIs, which are application interfaces for web-based data resources via a web data connector. So this allows Tableau to connect to hundreds, if not thousands, of additional data resources. Once we have chosen our data connection, we will be able to start building some content. But before we get into that, I want to take a moment to look at some of these other elements. As we're learning and trying to understand how to work with Tableau, there are lots of training resources right over here to the right that can help us get started. I like to emphasize this because Tableau has a huge community and a huge collection of resources and learning facilitation throughout our various different web spaces. So here on our learning page, we have hundreds of videos and resources on how to do all kinds of specific or general things in detail. These little explainer videos help you get right into the process and help you to understand how to do something that might be very simple, like connecting to data, or how to do something more complex, like creating specific kinds of calculations. In addition to this, we have the Tableau community. Now, the Tableau community on our Tableau community forums is a great place to go to ask questions, to see what other people are working on, and to generally see what are the areas of focus for the community. This is also a place that you can go to communicate directly with our development team through the ideas page. So that you can see, get a sense of what people are interested in and what's coming down the pipe. The ideas page is a great place also to go and vote up ideas that our development team is considering for future add to Tableau. In addition to that, we have a really great web presence in a lot of other spaces. just Googling anything plus Tableau will often result in the Tableau documentation around whatever that particular topic is. And we also host a YouTube channel that is chock full of really great resources. Specifically, many of our most popular content from our Tableau conference is published here, so you can get significantly deeper explorations of topics that were presented at our conference. So if you're interested in, for example, understanding mapping, you can come in here and get much more detailed descriptions of how to do specific things with maps in Tableau. So some really great content in here for us in our community. We are constantly trying to build that space and are often considered one of the best, having one of the best communities in the business intelligence space. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that. So the last piece that I want to emphasize here is these sample workbooks. These are often overlooked, but I think that they're incredibly valuable for a lot of different folks who are just getting started with Tableau. And one of the main ways that these add value is providing you with an alternative view of your data than you might be used to looking at. In the first example, for instance, all of these dashboards are designed with visual best practices in mind. But in this first example, we have a really good representation of how a dashboard should be designed or can be designed to support communication. So here, for example, we have what we call a ban bar or ban numbers. These are the principal figures that are often asked for our data set. We have a map that represents our geographic context visually, as well as area charts that help us to understand the individual context for these values over time. What's really cool about these is that they're interactive, so that filtering the data here changes the rest of the visualization. So all of our numbers are changing, all of our area charts are changing to represent this data. We even see examples of really good ways to show things like Biz in Tooltip, as you can see here. Now, the idea here is that not only can you use these dashboards to get ideas or different ideas on how or what a good dashboard can look like, you can also use these to see how these content are built, so that you can understand the placement of the various different pieces in order to build something like this for yourself. So I highly encourage you to take a look at some of these dashboards as an example source for your use case. So we talked a bit about what Tableau is and how we're going to navigate around it and how we're going to use it. But let me give you sort of the context for our conversation today. Today we're going to be building out several visualizations and a dashboard in an effort to help you all understand the basic principles of Tableau, and perhaps could leave our conversation today and go sit down at your desk and build out some content using your own data. We are also available if you have questions about whatever it is that you're working on, your use case, how we can develop it out in different ways. So if you have follow-up that you'd like to have, Jason and I are always open to helping support our customers in the region. Without further ado, though, let's go ahead and connect to some data. So the data that we're going to be connecting to is some data that I collected from the FAA. Now, this FAA data is all about wildlife strike incidents that occur to aircraft during the taxi, takeoff, and landing process. Now, the reason that we're looking at this data is because a lot of this data is the sort of demographic data or sort of categorical data that many of our state and local customers are working with. It might not be, aircraft information that you're working with, but it's things like categories associated with the public utility, with public safety, with sanitation, with public health, and the various different categories of that business. And that's part of this demonstration. The other part of this is kind of personal. Prior to COVID, I spent a lot of time traveling all over the West in support of my job, and I wanted to get a sense of what are some of the risks intrinsic to my heavy air travel job. So I wanted to explore this data to better understand those risks. So that's what we're going to do during this presentation. Here we've connected to our data. I'm using a text table, and by connecting to this text table, it actually renders the data in columns and rows as it's represented in my text table here. And Tableau is pulling down this information and starting to do something really interesting. It's starting to encode these columns of data with information. So an important part of any business intelligence or sort of data work is starting to create a structure of understanding what we call metadata around the particular data elements. And Tableau is doing that all the time. And as we develop this understanding, Tableau actually allows us to preserve these metadata structures in what we call a Tableau data source. So in addition to content, what we call dashboards and visualizations, I've consistently said Tableau helps you to build dashboards and visualizations, but it also helps you to build these data sources. And by having subject matter experts and data specialists and analyst specialists who are familiar with this data build these data sources, it helps us to craft a single source of truth around particular data topics that can be used over and over again by any business users or other folks inside of the organization. So this is a critical value add that Tableau brings to bear. And it all starts right here at the beginning when we connect to our data. So some of that you'll see here is here in my header, I have a little bit of context around what kind of data I'm connected to and where that data is coming from. It's also encoded in blue here, and as we add additional context, that's going to come to bear again in the future. So I've connected to this data, and it has information about the various different classes of aircraft, the particular wildlife that is encountered, all kinds of different pieces of context around when these things happened, who did it happen to, remarks about it, etc. So this is really helpful. But I have another piece of context here that adds a little bit more nuance. So I have this airport ID value, but I don't have in this list, I don't have the actual name of the airport. And I'd like to add that airport name to this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a table to my existing data set. It's another text table, but something important to note here is all of these tables highlighted in white are different data sources that I can also reference with this data connection. Now, right now I'm connecting to a text table, which is really common. And I could also add here a reference to a database or something like that. But oftentimes when we're working with data, and we're working with, say, a SQL Server, Oracle, Google, IBM, whatever it happens to be, it's often very hard for me to be, referencing my SQL server, and then I need to get some information and some context from my Oracle database. It's very hard to combine those data resources within their own context. Oracle doesn't like to play with Microsoft, Google doesn't like to play with Oracle, et cetera, et cetera. But in Tableau, we don't care what the point of origin is, or what we're data agnostic. So we can actually allow you to combine data from many different data contexts all together to get the data view that you need for whatever work that you have. So for me, I need to augment my data with the airport information. So that's what I'm going to do. So I connect to my airport table, and it adds a new table of data to my connection through what we call a join. Now, that data table here we can see is tagged in orange, and all of the columns of data associated with it are tagged in orange as well. We can modify this relationship here by clicking on the Venn diagram and choosing a relationship that makes sense for this connection. Also, Tableau is pretty smart. It notices if there are common data fields and automatically connects those data fields together as the point of common value. Tableau also, for the data wonks in the room, Tableau also recognizes cardinality and will look for the data connection of the highest cardinality. What that means to most of us is if there is one field that has 1 or 2 values and another field that has 10 values and both of them exist in both data tables, Tableau is going to choose the one with the most common values as the primary data connection. That, so that, connection with 10 common values is going to be chosen as the connecting data dimension here instead of the one with 1 or 2. So Tableau is doing some smart stuff in here. But if it doesn't choose the right connection, or it cannot find the correct connection, I can come in here and tell it how to relate these data together, which is fantastic. So I'm happy with this data relationship. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to start to look at my data set down here. So in addition to being able to connect the data across all kinds of different data sources, I can also do some pretty easy, a pretty quick, easy cleanup here in the data connection window. So for example, from my airport table, the column that I need is this airport name. These other columns are not necessary for this analysis. Even the data column that we're using to make this relationship, I don't need to keep it. So I'm going to go ahead and select these columns and choose to hide them. Now, Tableau is a read-only tool, so it's not making any changes to the backend data system. And that means when I remove those columns, it's not actually deleting the columns in the backend data tables or anything like that. It's just hiding them. It's no longer querying those columns of data, which is really helpful. Other things that I can do in order to clean up my data, I can tell Tableau how to think about the data in a particular column. So Tableau has looked at this airport ID field, and it has considered it to be a text value. But Tableau also has some valuable geographic information baked into the tool. And I might want to actually map these airport locations. So I want to see if I can assign this airport ID a geographic value. So I'm going to click on ABC. I'm going to go down to geographic role, and I see that there is a field for airport. So I'm going to select this field, and Tableau is going to give these values a geographic role. It essentially is going to allow me to map these locations once I get into the tool. Now, if the geographic area that you want to map is not listed here, that's okay. If you have access to Esri data files or other geographic files from or spatial data, Tableau can connect to most spatial data platforms. So if you want to connect to Esri, or if you want to reference Mapbox, or if you want to reference, geographic data in the form of latitude and longitude, or spatial data in an Oracle data store or a Microsoft data store, then you can do that. So we've connected to our data. We've done some cleanup, and now let's go ahead. Oh, before we jump into the next space. So what we've done is we've transformed our data to some degree. We've added a data connection. We've cleaned up our columns of data. If we need to clean up our rows of data or exclude specific information, we can add filters here to filter data at the row level. This is really helpful for us to be able to, if we have a very large data set and we only want to take a snapshot of that data or a sort of the most recent values from that data, then we can use filters here to make that selection. We also have one final choice, which is how we want to connect to our data. Tableau data connections allow us for almost all of our data connections to choose either a live connection to our data or an extract. Now, a live connection allows us to allows Tableau to maintain a link to a data environment, whether that's a database or an Excel file or whatever that happens to be. And as new data is added and stored in that data location, Tableau will update automatically. Maintaining that linkage to that data environment, though, might not be undesirable or might not be desirable. We might not want to be constantly checking for new data in a data environment that is under a lot of strain from data ingestion or other processes. So that's where we can take advantage of things like extracts. All of our data connections also have the ability to be extracted. And extracts allow us to take a snapshot of the data at a point in time, and then using Tableau server, schedule updates to the data based on a frequency that makes sense for that data set. So if I take a snapshot of my data, build out a report, and then publish that up to my server, I can tell Tableau server, oh, I want that data to be updated every hour or every day or every month. And that way I don't have to come back and rebuild this report or reestablish this data connection or manually refresh the data whenever a new report or new information is requested. So lots of power here with our connection capabilities. So let's actually build some content. So now that I've moved into what we call the canvas view or the sheet view, I can start to combine the various different columns of data that I had in my data source view, represented here. All of those columns of data are now listed over here to the left. And these allow me to, these are sort of the core building blocks of Tableau. What we call the dimensions and measures in our data are the constituent elements that we're going to use to slice and dice our data and build out our visualizations. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm interested in seeing how many records are we referencing in our data. So I'm just going to double click on this value here, wildlife strike count. This might also be listed as number of records in some of your versions of Tableau. So let's take a look at this. So here, when I select that, I can see Tableau has built a visualization, a bar chart, and it's representing 33,800 rows of data. So this is a respectable data set. We can add, now that we've brought this out here, we can start to add some context to this. So I can see that I have thousands of records of data. Now, for my initial analysis, one of the things that I wanted to understand was what air carriers were experiencing the most wildlife strikes and the most significant wildlife strikes. So let's see if we can answer that question. So there's a couple of fields over here called operator. I'm going to go ahead up here to the search bar, and I'm going to filter my data to what I'm interested in looking at. So I want to filter this down to just operator. I like using this to help clean up my visual space over here so that I'm not distracted by other elements and can work with what I have here. Sometimes the naming convention doesn't allow for as easy a collection as this, but that just goes to show that naming convention for our data elements can be valuable, and I can rename my data elements here to help facilitate different kind of search capabilities and things like that. We highly recommend, as you're developing out data resources as a best practice, to make sure that whatever your data columns are over here, that they're named in such a way that the general community of users, the business users, whoever is going to be consuming this information, can quickly and easily understand what it is that they're looking at. So I have three categories here. I have operator type, operator subtype, and operator. I'm just going to click on operator type now and just take a look at what this is showing me. I can see that it's created a bar chart. It's split out the bars for the various different categories. I'm going to go ahead and pivot this. It's actually easier to read a horizontal bar chart than it is to read a vertical bar chart. And while most common business practices have us build vertical bar charts, this is actually the visual best practice, a horizontal bar chart. And we'll see how that becomes valuable as we go through this. So I can see here that operator type breaks down my operators into various different categories: domestic passenger, unknown, cargo, private or business, and other. If I bring out subtype, I can see how that breaks out even further. And what I can see here is there's actually a hierarchy at play of categories here. So I can actually build out that hierarchy by simply dragging one element onto another. And you'll see how the operator type is highlighted in blue in the background. This indicates that I'm going to be affecting that dimension. I can name my hierarchy. I'm going to call this carrier hierarchy. And now there's a new object that I can work with. I can add my operator value into this hierarchy as well. So now that I've done that, I can drill in and out using these little plus and minus icons, drill in and out of my values here in order to get the view that I want. So I'm interested in focusing on domestic passenger carriers. So I'm going to choose to keep this. And I also want to focus on domestic carriers. These code-share carriers are interesting, but these are mostly small airlines or international airlines that work with these other major carriers. So I'm just interested in these major domestic carriers. So I'm going to choose to keep this as well. The other thing I'm going to do, when I choose keep only, it creates these filters. I want these filters to be used throughout my analysis. So I'm simply going to choose to go to this filter, apply this to all using the related data sources that I'm referencing here. I'm going to use this for both of them, all using related data sources. So that's going to come in handy as we continue to build out our analysis. These filters will be applied to all of my visualizations as I build them. So looking at this data, I can see that my domestic carriers here there are several with lots and lots of incidents, but the one that I have traveled on the most, Southwest, has by far the most number of incidents. And I found this to be very concerning when I first looked at this. If I right-click on this value up here, I can actually look at that. I can use a quick table calculation here. These quick table calculations are common business calculations that I can select from a list rather than having to write and script these write these calculations from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to see a percent of total. I'm going to go ahead and give this the tag here, the value of these. So I can see that roughly 35% of all of our incidents are occurring to Southwest Airlines aircraft. But as I look through this list, American, Delta, these make sense, but then some of these values like US Airways and Continental, these airlines haven't existed for years. And so what I can do is I can actually merge them together with other airlines in the way that they merged historically. So I can combine American Airlines and US Airways. I can combine let's see here, Delta and Continental. I can combine United and Northwest, and what was the other one? Frontier. No, that's not right. We'll just do United and Northwest. And even Alaska merged with Virgin America a couple of years ago, so we can combine those as well. So what we've done here is we've created a new object here called a group. This group is a new data dimension that represents these combined values as a new category. And I can even bring this dimension, this group dimension, into my hierarchy to show and work with this combination and continue to drill into my analysis even further. I can also edit some of these names so that they are their current name rather than American plus United or whatever these values might be. So I can come in here and manage that. And this helps us to see a more realistic view of the data as it currently is. Southwest still represents 35%, but American also represents a significant percentage of these. So this is helping us to see the data as it should be, rather than to see it sort of parceled out into smaller units that no longer exist. This ability to create new data dimensions on the fly using grouping is also incredibly powerful for manipulating data as I'm working with it for my own internal business analysis. I'm going to go ahead and make this, fit this to the screen, fit the entire view, so that I can more easily see these contexts. So as I'm looking at this data, I can see something of concern to me. The airline that I travel on the most has the most incidents. But another question that comes to mind is, if it has the most incidents, how severe are those incidents? So I have a value in here, cost of repairs, that can help me assess severity. So I'm actually going to take this value and I'm going to pull it up here onto color. I want the average cost of repairs. And I can see here now that from a severity sake, this is the sort of cost of repairs. The average cost of repairs for American and United is significantly higher than any of our other average cost of repairs. In both cases, we have over $2 million in average, whereas in many of these other cases, it's 150,000, 400,000, 600,000, et cetera. So this sense of severity is helping me to evaluate the context of my data. So let's go ahead and call this carriers. So this report is going to be helpful, but I want to drill into this topic. I want to understand why these are so much higher than what I'm seeing in these other values. So I actually have a tool that can help me with that. It's called Explain Data. It's a little light bulb icon right here. So I've selected American Airlines, and I want Tableau to explain why this value is so high. So Tableau explain data, what it does is it runs a series of statistical tests against all of the values, all of the data dimensions and measures associated with cost of repairs. And it's going to return to me any values that it sees as statistically significant results. So what it's observed is that the operator, American Airlines, represents a significant value above all other categories as operators. So for American Airlines, this is the highest number of records associated with, or rather cost of repairs, that as compared to every other operator. So that's pretty important. The other thing is it's saying that there is a single extreme value. And according to this report, automatically generated by Tableau's explain data, the selected mark American Airlines is made up of 18 records, 18 of our 33,000 records. One record with a value of $41 million is increasing the average cost of repairs. If this extreme value is excluded, the average cost of repairs changes from $2.5 million to $216,000, which is much more in context with some of the other values that we were seeing. So I'm curious about this. I'd actually like to explore this data some more. So there's a report down here, a dashboard or a visualization that was automatically generated by explain data. And I can actually use this to further my analysis. I can click on this little icon and it builds the report for me. It builds the analysis. So here it's got 18 marks, all of the different records that have cost of repairs associated with them, with my outlier out here. Now, this collection of points is only for American Airlines. But if I remove this filter over here, it gives me all of the domestic carriers' results. The advantage here of this report is that even though explain data generated this report, it's entirely possible, it's very easy, in fact, for me to manipulate or work with this report and iterate on the findings. So if explain data gives me some context, but I want to go deeper, I can simply use the report that it's generated as a starting point and continue to build on it. This really adds power to the explain to the analyst. Instead of forcing me to use the single context that was generated by the report, I can actually build on and manipulate that in the same way that I would build on and manipulate any other report that I build myself. It really keeps the analyst in the driver's seat. So let's take a look. I want to understand more about this $41 million incident. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my remarks to give this context. I'll put that on detail. And now I can actually see what happened here. So for this incident occurred when multiple bird strikes happened during the initial climb. They lost thrust in both engines and landed in the Hudson River. This single extreme value represents the miracle on the Hudson, the single most expensive wildlife strike incident in American aviation history, and one without any loss of life. This is an amazing story, but it's also an amazing outlier in the context of wildlife strikes for our data. I can bring out things like species to help me gain additional context. So I'm going to put species on detail as well. And what's interesting is I can actually use this species value here, Canada goose, to find out where other Canada geese incidents occur, most of which occur much more around the median. In this other outlier here, we see that this is bald eagles. Again, I can look at this to see where we have other incidents of bald eagles occurring around the median. So these are outliers, and I want to capture these outliers and use them later on. Create a set. A set is a powerful tool that allows me to create in-out groups. I'm going to call these cost outliers. Okay. And I can use this set later on to filter my data in my report. I'm going to go ahead and show filter. so that I can use this later on to see how my data changes when I exclude those outliers. So here, this data represents my distribution of information without the outliers. So that'll be helpful in my analysis. The last piece that I'd like to build is a map. I want to see where these incidents are occurring. So I'm going to call this cost outliers. This is my map. So that airport ID field that I created, I'm going to use this to map all the airports in my report. So let's go ahead and map them. Double click on airport ID, and it automatically creates a pin map of all of the airports that were associated with these wildlife strike incidents on domestic carriers. I can bring in the values that I've been working on, like my count of incident reports. I'll put that on size, make that size a little bit bigger. And I can also put my average cost of repairs on color. I want to change my legend. I can do that. Any legend or pretty much any element in Tableau can often be edited or modified by double clicking on it. I want to make these pop out a little bit more. Reverse. So now my more major incidents are a darker color. And then I'm going to increase my or decrease my transparency or opacity so that I can see some of those things in the background. And then I'm going to add a border. There we go. So now you can see that there's an incident out here, that KLGA. I want to use my airport name to give that context. So now I can see that that is LaGuardia. I can see that this one over here is Bob Hope, Denver, Kansas City, etc. So I can highlight those values. Now I've generated my map. I've got a good sense of where most of my incidents are occurring. I want to put these pieces together into a dashboard. So once I've built the visualizations, I can now combine those visualizations together in a dashboard. So this is an interface. So we've gone from the data connection interface, where we're pulling out data sources and building out connections. I've moved to the sheet view or the canvas view, where we're pulling out data elements and building visualizations. And now into the dashboards, where we're pulling out visualizations and building dashboards. So I want to scale this up to the size of my screen and then fix it there. And I want to start with my map. So I want the map to be sort of the centerpiece of my report. And then I'm going to pull out my carrier analysis and my cost outliers. I want my cost outliers to be a bit smaller. I want this to fit the space that I'm giving it. And I want these pieces, I want them to be interactive. So when I make a selection in one of these pieces, I want it to affect all of the other pieces. So first, I want to make sure that my filters are all available. So I want my type and subtype filter. I want to use my map as a filter. I want to use my carriers as a filter, and I want to use my incidents as a filter. I also want to apply my outlier filter to everything, just like I'm doing for my operators. So apply all using this data source. So now when I select something like Bob Hope, all of my data filters down to the operators operating at Bob Hope and the incidents that have occurred there. So I can see here that there was a $3 million incident that occurred in Burbank that is represented by this data. So I can also focus in on things like where is American Airlines operating, where is Southwest operating, and what were the most expensive incidents for Southwest. Here, the most expensive was the one here in Burbank at Bob Hope, and this just reiterates the idea that I hate flying into Bob Hope International Airport. But these analyses help us to gain a better understanding of what's going on. So for example, if I want to exclude my outliers down here, I can turn them off, and I can see how my map changes and how my carriers change to represent the data when I exclude those multi-million-dollar outliers. So here in this context, United has some of the most expensive incidents with a $600,000 average cost of repairs, but that's significantly less than the $2.5 million average cost of repairs that we were seeing before. We can also see that the incidents are shifting away from LaGuardia and to Southwest Florida International out here and Kansas City. So we can change how we're interpreting our data based on whether or not we are including outliers in our analysis. Now that I've done this, I can publish this workbook up to my server. I want to use, yeah, that's fine. And I want to publish this into my state and local government location. Oh, I want to publish the whole workbook. I just want to publish the dashboard. Okay, publish. And now I can share this content with my community of users. Once content is published up to the server, we can take a look at how our users can interact with it. Again, we have the same interactivity of our dashboard that we saw in Tableau Desktop, where selecting elements will allow us to filter our data. We also have a number of other things that we can do. We can web edit this data in the server. We can subscribe to reports that might be helpful to us on a regular cadence, or set up alerts so that if certain metrics pass a particular value, that we can be alerted to them passing that value. We can also look at the data quality of this data. With data details, if there is information, since this was just published, there's not historical information, but if there's information about the data trail in this data set, then we can find information here under data details. The last piece of this that I want to talk about is ask data. So ask data represents the ability to ask and answer questions of data sources that have been published to the Tableau server. So I can actually type in or Google questions to this data set. So here I have a child welfare. I can ask a question of number of case ID, and it will interpret what I'm asking and give me a choice about what I want to evaluate by, and then render a visualization by county. Let's see if I have, here we go, so that I can see different visualizations based on this. So got a full count of my case IDs, and then I was able to see how many cases were occurring in each county. And I can see here it generated first a number and then a map just by typing in questions or Googling my data, which I can then save and use as the starting point for another analysis. So this has been sort of a survey of all of the different capabilities of Tableau, of the Tableau platform. If you have additional questions or you'd like to reach out for more information, please follow up with Jason Caffrey as the Regional Account Director, and we can help support you in any way that you might need. Thank you for your time.